Steve Jobs entered the world on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. But before he could even open his eyes, life had already taken an unexpected turn. His biological parents were two young students who couldn't raise him, so they decided to give him up for adoption. A kind couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, adopted baby Steve. Paul was a mechanic and Clara was a bookkeeper. They didn't have much money, but they gave Steve what mattered most: love and curiosity. Growing up in a small California house, Steve loved to help his father repair cars and build things in the garage. He was fascinated by how machines worked and by the magic of creating something from nothing. But he was also different. He asked endless questions, challenged teachers, and refused to follow the rules blindly. He once said later in life, "It's more fun to be a pirate than to join the Navy." From a young age, Steve Jobs wasn't just interested in what was, he was obsessed with what could be. When Steve grew up, he went to college, but it didn't last long. He attended Reed College in Oregon, but after just one semester, he dropped out. Not because he was lazy, but because he didn't see meaning in the classes he was paying for. He spent his nights sleeping on friends' floors, returning empty bottles for money, and walking long distances to free meals at a local temple. But during that time, he did something unusual. He dropped in on the classes that interested him. One of them was calligraphy, the art of beautiful writing. He had no idea it would ever matter, until years later when Apple computers became famous for their elegant fonts. Jobs often said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backward." That simple class, that small curiosity, would one day shape the look of digital design forever. In 1976, Steve was 21 years old and full of big ideas. He teamed up with his friend Steve Wozniak, a shy but brilliant engineer. Together, they started a company, not in an office, but in Jobs' parents' garage. Their dream was simple but bold: to build a personal computer that anyone could use. Wozniak built the hardware, Jobs imagined the design and the experience. He cared deeply about how the product looked and felt. He wanted technology to be beautiful and human. They called their company Apple. Their first computer, the Apple I, was simple but innovative. Soon after, the Apple II became a huge success, one of the first personal computers to reach homes and schools. By the time Jobs was 25, Apple had made him a millionaire. But Steve wasn't satisfied. He didn't just want to make money, he wanted to make history. In 1984, Jobs introduced the Macintosh, a computer that changed everything. It had a mouse, icons, and a friendly interface, a computer that felt alive. People loved it, but inside Apple, not everyone was happy. Steve was young, passionate, and sometimes difficult. He demanded perfection from everyone around him, and not everyone could keep up. Soon, Apple's board of directors decided to remove him from his own company. At only 30 years old, Steve Jobs, the man who had created Apple, was fired. He later said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. It was painful, but it gave him something priceless: freedom to start over. After leaving Apple, Jobs didn't give up. He started a new computer company called Next. The machines were expensive, but the software was powerful. He also bought a small animation studio from George Lucas, a company that would later become Pixar. At first, people laughed at him. But in 1995, Pixar released its first full-length film, Toy Story. It became a global hit, and Jobs became a billionaire again. Meanwhile, Apple was struggling without him. The company that had once led the computer revolution was now falling behind. In 1997, Apple made a surprising move. They invited Steve Jobs back as CEO. He returned with one mission: to make Apple simple, creative, and different again. What followed was one of the greatest comebacks in business history. Steve Jobs redesigned Apple's products with a focus on simplicity, design, and experience. In 1998 came the iMac, colorful, friendly, and unlike anything on the market. Then the iPod changed the way people listened to music. He famously said, 1,000 songs in your pocket. Next came the iPhone, a single device that replaced phones, cameras, and music players. People didn't just buy Apple products, they loved them. They felt part of something bigger, something creative. Finally, the iPad and MacBook followed, completing the Apple ecosystem. Jobs had not only changed technology, he had changed how people interacted with the world. He became known for his black turtleneck, jeans, and simple presentations. Each time he walked on stage and said, "One more thing," the world listened. Behind the success, however, Steve Jobs was fighting a silent battle. In 2003, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. At first, he refused surgery and tried alternative treatments, hoping he could cure himself. But after some time, the disease returned stronger. Even while sick, he continued to work. He attended meetings, designed products, and made decisions until the very end. He once said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose." Jobs believed that death wasn't the end. It was a reminder to live each day with passion and purpose. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away peacefully at his home, surrounded by his family. He was only 56 years old. But his ideas, his energy, and his vision live on. He didn't just create products, he changed culture. He transformed how we think about design, creativity, and life itself. In one of his most famous speeches, given at Stanford University, he told graduates, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition." Those words have inspired millions around the world, not just to build technology, but to build a life that matters. Today, Apple continues to shape the world, from iPhones to iPads, from MacBooks to the App Store. But behind every product is the spirit of Steve Jobs, bold, creative, and beautifully simple. He showed us that innovation is not about machines, it's about people. It's about believing that what you create can make life better. And even though he's gone, his voice still echoes in every young dreamer who dares to think differently. Steve Jobs' life teaches us that success isn't about money or fame. It's about vision, passion, and discipline. He was a man who turned rejection into opportunity, failure into creativity, and technology into art. He believed that curiosity and courage could change the world, and he proved it. He once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And that is the legacy of Steve Jobs, the man who dared to dream differently, and by doing so, changed the world forever.